Hi everyone. It's great to see some familiar faces here this afternoon. I know some of you as clients and also some of you were here yesterday as well, so thank you for coming back and welcome again. I know a lot of you here have probably gone through the trademark registration process. For others, it's new and maybe a little bit daunting. So today I'm going to go through some practical tips and to show you about how to safeguard your trademarks in China and show that it's not really the big scary giant that it's often made out to be. But first, I do have to start with this. So we all recognise these brands. Most of them are international brands, but we've also got good old New Zealand Cookie Time. And the one thing that all of these brands have in common is that the owners have lost these trademarks in China. And the reason for that is that China is a civil law country and it operates on a first-to-file system. And what that means is that the Chinese office, trademark office, recognise priority of trademarks based on who has filed a trademark application first. So it's essentially first in, first served. And it's a little bit different to New Zealand and to most Western countries. And the reason for that is that we also recognise prior use. So you could be operating a shop, running a business for 5 years in New Zealand, but never got around to registering your trademark. That's fine because you have rights based on your prior use. That's not going to cut the mustard in China. You need to file an application in China. What this has done is that it's created this real industry, a separate industry over there for opportunists and trademark squatters to get in there and file applications which really belong for trademarks that really belong to other people. So I had an example of a client last year, a food company. They filed their trademark here in New Zealand and 24 hours later, the same mark for the same products had been filed in China. And, this wasn't a massive company that were world-renowned. They were just, a good old little Kiwi food company. So we've always thought that these squatters had been sort of backyard operations. It's not the case. They're really sophisticated. They've got the technology to monitor what you're doing in New Zealand and around the world. And as soon as they find something they like, they'll go ahead and file it themselves. I had some figures the other day of trademark applications being filed, and they have 2 million in the last year applications being filed. And it's staggering. So what we have in New Zealand is about 17,000 applications filed a year. And I know we're old, little old New Zealand, I can say that, being an Aussie, but it is a really small number, but China's well ahead of the US as well. But what I found even more surprising is that of those 2 million applications being filed, 90% were filed by Chinese companies and individuals. And the reason I thought it was surprising is, China's such a massive market for foreign brand owners. Why aren't they getting in there and filing applications? So I'm going to have a look at a couple of war stories, not to scare you too much, but just sort of set the picture a little bit. So the first one is Tesla, the US electric car manufacturer. So there was a guy a couple of years ago, a China businessman. He ran a skincare company, nothing to do with car manufacturing. And he applied and successfully registered the trademark Tesla in China. So a couple of years later, Tesla decided they'll try and get into the market. They started selling their cars and they got slapped with a US $4 million lawsuit for infringement of the businessman's trademark. The matter only settled last month, and the result of the settlement was that the businessman, he cancelled his registration for Tesla. And I'd say that, there was some payment obviously by Tesla for him to do that. That wasn't made public. But as soon as news of the settlement was made public, Tesla's share price rose 4.4%. So a really good outcome for them in the end. Another one is Michael Jordan, not so lucky. So Nike thought they'd done a really good job. They had filed an application for the English word Jordan in China. So, tick the box, we've done our trademark. What they hadn't done, though, is thought a bit beyond that. And there was a Chinese sportswear company called Chowdan. And what they had done is they had filed the Pinyin version of Jordan, which was Chowdan. So they had also filed for this logo here, which is Michael Jordan doing a slam dunk thing. So when Michael Jordan found out about it, he filed proceedings against them in 2012. And this company's huge, this Chinese sportswear company. They've got 6,000 stores throughout China. So they had the money to defend anything that Michael Jordan threw at them. And in August, a court decision came out, and the court found in favour of the Chinese company. And they said that Michael Jordan wasn't able to rely on the fact that his name and his image was well known, because the name Jordan was a common surname, and that this image here you couldn't actually tell that was Michael Jordan. There was no facial features on it. And I think it's a really tough call. It's pretty hard to say that Jordan's a common surname in China. And I don't know any Chinese called Jordan, I grew up with Michael Jordan and my brother having Air Jordans, and I think most people would know who that logo belongs to. So it does possibly show the bias of the Chinese courts towards Chinese manufacturers, Chinese businesses and individuals. So what's the answer? The easiest thing to do and the most obvious answer is to get in and file your trademark application as soon as possible, before anyone else does. And if it's the one thing you take home today from my presentation, it would be that: file ASAP. Even if China's only a blip on your radar, get in there and do it as soon as you can. So when we have clients come to us and say, yep, we want to go ahead and file in China, we put together an IP strategy. And it's a bit more complicated or complex than what we would do if we were filing in New Zealand. So obviously we would file for their English word mark. I've just used the example of one of our clients, Linden Leaves. So we'd file for that. But you can't leave it there, because that's not going to give you your broadest protection. What you also need to look at is filing in these other versions. And the reason for that is that your English word mark, a registration for that in China, will not automatically protect you from others using and registering similar marks written in Chinese. And the other thing that your client needs, or you as a client need to think about when you're looking at filing an application, is to also think about a Chinese name as well, not just your English name. Because if you don't, Chinese consumers are certainly going to do it for you. And Ralph Lauren was a really good example of that happening. So they filed for Ralph Lauren in English, but they never came up with a Chinese name for themselves. And as soon as clothes, hats hit the stores, the consumers went out there, loved it, saw the polo player on the horse, and came up with a name for them which translated to three-legged horse, which is not what you want. It's a bit unfortunate. So, just a little bit. So what we're saying to clients is Pinyin, look at filing in Pinyin, which is the Chinese phonetic alphabet. So for Linden Leaves, they chose Li Dan Li, which sounds similar to Linden Leaves. And the other one is look at filing in Chinese characters. And often this is a combination of a mark that sounds similar to your English version, but also has a really desirable meaning. So for Linden Leaves, they had a couple of options to choose from, and what they chose was this mark here means beautiful flower. So a really nice connotation, particularly for skincare and body care. If it all sounds a bit hard, like, oh, how am I going to come up with Pinyin and Chinese characters? Don't worry, we've got agents that we work with closely in China who can come up with these versions for you. So unlike New Zealand, when you're filing in China, you need to just go beyond filing for your English mark. So you are looking at more costs, because you're filing, for one mark you're filing, if you have the budget, up to 3 versions of that mark. The good news is that we had news just recently from the Trademarks Office that said the official fee for filing in China is now going down by New Zealand $50 a class. It's not a lot probably, but when you're filing in a lot of classes, it does add up. So that's a really good sign. What happens if you can't register your trademark in China? We have a few clients where this has happened. So they've either been the victim of a squatter and trying to get their trademarks back from that squatter haven't worked, or they've filed an application and they've had an objection from the Trademarks Office that said, no, you can't register because there's an earlier mark already registered for the same or similar mark. So what we're doing, we're trying to overcome that objection. It can take a long time. It can take 2 to 3 years to try and overcome those objections. And other clients just don't have the money to try and sort it out. So they're in the position of using a mark in China that they haven't got a registration for, and that someone else may already have a registration. So what are the risks to your business if you decide to enter into the market without a registration? The first one is infringement, and it's not unusual. This is not particular to China. This would happen in any other part of the world. So the trademark owner could file proceedings against you for trademark infringement. What is unique to China, though, is that they have this great little defence, and it's called OEM, which stands for Original Equipment Manufacturer. And what that means, and I guess it's risen up because China's like the manufacturing hub of the world. So what it means is if your products are manufactured solely in China for export purposes, so you're not selling your product in China, it's just been manufactured, labelled, packaged up and sent off, then the courts will say that this is not trademark infringement because there has been no use of the trademark in China. So it's a really handy defence to have, and I'm sure a few of you here, you may fall into the position of being an OEM business, and if so, that's great. And I would recommend strongly that if you fall into that position, I would recommend that you, when you're negotiating your agreements with your Chinese manufacturers, your distributors, that you have a clause in your agreement that says that your products are for export only. And if you can use the wording original equipment manufacturer, that's great. What I'd also say is attached to the back of that agreement your trademark certificates of registration for the countries where the products are being exported to. So if you're exporting from China to New Zealand, attach your certificates which have been issued by IPONs. And that shows that you're the legitimate trademark owner in the export destination. Another risk if you decide to use a mark which you don't have a registration for is that it could be detained by customs. And a few countries have this, you may have come across it before. So what happens is a trademark owner can file a customs notice with the customs authorities for a particular mark. They have to prove that they own that mark. And what customs will do is they'll detain any product which they think is the same or similar to the mark that is the subject of the notice. What we're finding is if goods are detained by customs, the trademark owner will get in contact with the exporter or the importer, and often that opens up dialogue, and the trademark owner will often allow the goods to be released upon payment of a fee. The trouble is, though, if the trademark owner is quite savvy, that fee can be pretty high. Talking to some Chinese agents last week about this, how does this work in reality? They said that the incidence of trademark owners filing customs notices is pretty low, and they said even if that's the case, it's an impossible task for customs to monitor and inspect everything coming in and out of China. So while this is a risk to your business, it's at the lower end of the scale, but it's something you still need to keep in mind. So I want to move away a little bit from trademarks, my baby, to copyright. And copyright registration is something that more and more of our clients are considering as an alternative or as an adjunct to trademark protection. And I think up until recently it's probably been underutilised. China, and I guess the situations where you might consider copyright registration is, again, if your trademark has been taken by a squatter, or you filed an application and it's got received an objection from the office, not on the basis that there's been a third party earlier mark, but because they think your mark's descriptive or non-descriptive or non-distinctive. So what some clients are doing is, let's take advantage of the copyright registration system in China. It's an unusual system in that I can only think of Vietnam, who has a system like this. So while most countries are signatories to the Berne Convention, so they recognise copyright rights, China actually has a formal registration system. So you go through the process like you would for a trademark, and at the end you get a certificate of registration like you would with a trademark, and that's really useful for filing with regulatory bodies who love stamping paper. So to try and get a copyright registration, it's a fairly straightforward process. It needs to be a work of fine art, and that level is actually quite low. You couldn't get a word in plain text registered as a copyright work because there's no artistic element to it. But if you tried to apply for something like a heavily stylised word or a logo or a device, then you should be able to get copyright registration for that. Unlike trademarks, there's no, when you file an application for copyright, you don't have to cover particular goods or services or classes. It covers everything and anything, which is great because it's much broader protection than a trademark. There is, though, a limit to your protection, and that is 50 years from the date of the creation of the copyright work. So that's quite a bit shorter than trademarks, which is you just renew every 10 years over and over. And with China not being a party to the TPP, you may have heard that they're extending the duration of copyright to 70 years. China's not a party to that, so it will remain at 50 years. We found that copyright registration has been a really useful tool. We had a client, a food client, and they found out that a Chinese company had applied to register their logo. It was the same logo except the words were in Chinese characters as opposed to English, and they had filed it for food products, but food products which weren't related or the same as our clients' food products. So when we saw that, we thought, right, we'll file an opposition against their application. We filed on the basis that it's food products, the goods are similar. We also filed on the basis that there was an element of bad faith because our client was the true owner of that mark. And we also put in our copyright registration. And when the decision came out, we got a bit of a shock because we lost on the trademark side of things. The courts found that the goods were not similar, even though they were food products. They found that there wasn't enough to establish bad faith. But hey, we got through on infringement of our copyright registration. So it was a really great win for the client. You may have heard that there's been some changes to the trademark law in China. They came into effect in May last year to much fanfare. And a lot of the focus on the new laws was to try and clamp down on these trademark squatters. So one of the laws was to make it easier to establish a bad faith relationship if there had been a commercial, a contractual or a business relationship between the two parties. And I've got another client who found out a couple of years ago that their distributor who distributed their toothbrushes had filed for their an application for their trademark. Once they found out, they called up the distributor and said, what's going on? Can we have our mark back? Thinking that it was a mistake and they'd simply assign it back to our client. The distributor went, no, too hard, don't know how to do it. So our client went over to China thinking that they were going to sort out a deal, and the relationship completely broke down. The distributor wanted a 30-year exclusive license. Client wasn't prepared to give that, so came back. What we ended up doing was filing an application to oppose their application, and we filed it on the grounds of bad faith, and we thought, perfect, slam dunk. We had lots of evidence to show the relationship between the parties, and the decision's only just come out, and the courts have said, no, we don't think there is enough to show bad faith. And we're like, So that was decided under the old laws. So with the new laws coming in, what we're going to do is once the distributor's application proceeds to registration, we're going to file an invalidity action, which is like a late opposition, file the same evidence, and hope that it's going to be seen in a more favourable light under the new laws because it will clearly show that there is a business or a contractual relationship between the parties. The new laws have also clamped down on trademark agents and lawyers who knowingly assist squatters in filing applications, but also who knowingly assist squatters in negotiating with owners who are trying to get their trademarks back and trying to sell the marks to these owners for exorbitant prices. So that's a really good sign. There is some talk about, well not talk, there is a law around now prior use, some recognition of that. When you delve into it, it's actually, you have to have a established reputation in China. So it doesn't matter if you're world famous in New Zealand, you have to have use over a long period of time in China to take advantage of this prior use. So I think it's only really going to work in limited circumstances. My feeling around the law changes is that they are really good. We haven't seen much change yet for our clients in terms of making things easier and more cost effective for them to do business over there. But I think that's going to start coming in the next year or two once we get some court decisions through and decided under the new laws. How can we help? We can help you put together an IP strategy, not just for your trademarks, but for your patents and your designs as well. We can work with the agents that we use and trust in China. And I don't think this can be underestimated, because not all agents in China are dodgy, they're not, but there are a lot who are subpar. The advice we get from them is sort of copy and paste. It's, they're not that responsive, which can be quite difficult because you often have quite short time frames to work to. So we now have a group of really great agents that we know and trust. As Anton said, we visit them once or twice a year, so we have that personal relationship with them. And we think and we know they do a great job for our clients. We can help you negotiate your contracts, your licenses with your Chinese business partners. We have a commercial team that helps with that. And finally, we can help with finding opportunities in China. We have a great relationship with the NZTE. They do a great job. They have offices in Guangzhou, Beijing and Shanghai. And also with the likes of Bianca from Dakai, we can put you in contact with her as well. So to sum up, China's not like New Zealand. It's not how you would go through the trademark process. But if you have an IP professional to guide you through the process, and if you can get in there and file your applications as soon as possible, then you will really be able to take advantage of the huge benefits that China does offer. So I'm going to hand over to Bianca.
Hi. So we'll assume you've all protected your brand for China already, or maybe actually you want to figure out first if there is an opportunity and you should be doing this. And that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. So there are almost 500 million people in China who shop online. And it's really quite easy to see that you have to have more than just a good product or service to stand out in a market like that. So to get your brand noticed, it's about the right message to the right people, but it's also about using channels that are still largely unknown outside of China. And of course it has to be in Chinese on top of things. Now, who am I to talk to you about social media and digital marketing in China? I first came there as a student. I moved to Shanghai in 2005. I studied the language for a bit, but I very soon became involved with a small startup company at the time in the internet business, and they grew very rapidly together with the tech startup scene and the internet scene in China. Actually, we were first to bring a lot of new concepts to the country, such as agile methodologies. We hosted the first barcamp that there was ever in China, and we were very quite central to that kind of scene, the internet scene. I also saw a lot of the now massive Chinese internet companies pop up at the time. I choose not to go over to that side. That's why I'm standing here tonight. And I decided to leave China last year and come to New Zealand for the lovely clean air and clean water, but also for the close trade relations that exist between New Zealand and China. And it's been really, really interesting to see how much there's already going on and how many people and organizations are already helping businesses explore the opportunities in China. But I also saw that there is a good chance to help companies at the very early stages, helping to identify the opportunities and explore how to go after them. Now, my co-founder Kate is here tonight as well. We've set up Dakai quite recently, actually, to offer this very early stage help for businesses. And we focus on 3 areas. It always starts with focus on the market research, on identifying the opportunity, the customer, and the competition that is already out there. In next step, we focus on delivery. So this is all about marketing strategies and doing the actual marketing into China. And the third part is about the talent. We work with international students from China who came to study in New Zealand. So these are young people who grew up in an open China with the internet, digital natives very much, and then came here to study and to be educated. So they really understand both sides. They understand the culture and the language of China, but they also have been here long enough to understand how Kiwi culture works and how Kiwi businesses work. Right, so I'll give you 5 areas in this presentation to help you understand the importance of digital marketing and social media, specifically in China. Now, we start with these big 3 platforms that you really need to know if you want to do any business online in China. And people often start thinking, okay, so what's the equivalent of Facebook or Twitter or YouTube? And I'll just take my strategy that I already have and I convert it to China and I do the same thing. Now, not only is that quite a risky thought to just simply translate what you're already doing and assume it's going to work just as well, but it's also quite limiting because in many ways China's ahead of the rest of the world when it comes to social media. For example, users in China were able to embed multimedia content in their social media tools 18 months before you could do so on Twitter. And the companies behind these 3 platforms have found ways to monetize their apps very, very successfully long before, or actually some of the Western companies are still struggling to do that. So let's start with number 1, Wechat. Wechat started just a couple of years ago, really, as a messaging service, but very quickly grew to be the number 1 social networking platform, but also recently a customer relationship management platform, a commerce platform, a payment system. This is pretty much the future of mobile commerce. So Wechat has achieved what Facebook wants to do. They have become both a platform and a mobile portal. There's 1 billion users registered on Facebook. Half of them are active every month. 300 million of them are outside of China as well. It's very popular in Southeast Asia. And these users can do almost everything within the app. So yes, you can talk to your friends and you can post updates, but you can also shop in the app. You can order a taxi, you can order food, you can buy movie tickets, you can book your doctor's appointment, you can get books from the library, you can meet strangers, you can read some news, you can donate to charity. It's very, very long. I think I was just talking about this earlier, the news feature they've just released is you can find out where nearby there are crowds of people so you can avoid them, which is kind of a bit of a scary thought. So it's like traffic jams but with people. But I can see how there's a use for that in places like Shanghai or Beijing. And the most important thing for us to realize here is 15% of that 1 billion users have made purchases through Wechat. It's a huge amount of people.
Have you found there's a lot of New Zealand companies already sending to consumer end users via Wechat from here?
Well, what's the difference? Not a lot. There are companies that are doing it. There's certainly a huge amount of New Zealand products on there that are probably not being sold by those companies directly. So it's very easy to buy things via Wechat. It's very easy to put things up there because you don't have to build a whole new app. You just have to create an account. So that's already happening. It's certainly something that businesses need to know about.
How important is it for the, if you like, the social chatting side where people support and talk about the products as opposed to just putting it on there?
It's very, very important because that's where the customer service links in. So you talk to your customers directly on there and one-on-one. So it's all immediately linked in on the same platform. Talking about shopping, Taobao. Taobao is probably the site I missed the most since leaving China, because that's where you buy everything. It's the largest consumer-to-consumer platform, which is still 50% of all e-commerce in China. It's also the largest platform for the business-to-consumer trade. So this is Tmall, which has 70,000 international and Chinese brands present, including the likes of Apple, who usually would really like to have their own thing, but now they're present on Tmall, because you have to be. The differences, the same as I just said for Wechat, is there is a lot of communication between the customer and the brand going on. Here, it's free to list. You pay for advertisements for promoting your brand on it, not for the listing itself. And talking of payments, Alipay is the most important and the biggest payment solution. It's about half of all online sales in China goes through Alipay. They recently, last year, introduced international credit card systems as well, so this is now accessible for international businesses. And again, it's more than just a payment solution. You can do all sorts of things within the Alipay platform as well. Again, you can order taxis, you can pay for your hospital bookings, you can pay for your water and electricity bills on it. It's extremely convenient for consumers to use. And really the message to take away here is none of these have an equivalent in the West. There isn't anything that is as ubiquitous and versatile. So the bad news of my talk really is that you need a completely new marketing strategy for China. The good news is, if you do that, you have access to an audience that is already used to spending money online, that's much more open to doing so. And actually, I think learning how to do online marketing in places like China will give you a big advantage for your Western marketing strategy as well. Now, not only do we need a completely new strategy, we also need to do that on new platforms using new tools. Everything in China is on mobile. This is the country with one of the highest smartphone penetrations in the world. It's around 66% of all mobile users at the moment, which maybe doesn't sound that much, but if you think of the numbers for China, this means 400 million people with a smartphone. And the vast majority of these use it to go online, and they use it to shop online as well. So China has really leapfrogged the whole web area. Wechat never had a website. They didn't start out with a website. They started out mobile, and a lot of companies do that this way. And this also reflects on the expectations and the shopping behavior of consumers in China. So they really want to have the full experience. When they shop online using mobile, they expect there to be geolocation services. They expect there to be customer service embedded. They expect it to be easy to pay for it and not have to go to other places. And as a result of that being possible in China, mobile commerce has grown rapidly and is predicted to surpass that of desktop next year. This is particularly impressive if you think of course, a lot of businesses still doing things on computers and trading on computers. So this really shows the influence of the consumer side of things, the consumer purchases in China. Now, I said that a lot of companies don't bother with web anymore, and I thought I'll find a nice banking example since we are with BNZ here. Also because I unfortunately was a customer with them in China. HSBC, online banking. This is what it looks like. I posted this picture actually on my social media channels last year because I thought it was hilarious. My background is computer science, so I thought it was hilarious that they say this site is best viewed with Internet Explorer 5.5 or Netscape Navigator. I don't know if because I posted this online, but I double-checked before this presentation to see what it looks like now. It looks exactly the same today, except they removed the message down there, but the whole system hasn't been upgraded. And they're not going to, because what they use is this. So they have a mobile app that the customers are using. My Chinese bank that I was with, they didn't even do any online banking online. They just had an app that you needed to use. There wasn't any other choice. So if you're thinking now, well, either building a Chinese website or a mobile app in Chinese for the Chinese market, that's quite a lot of money to invest. Well, you don't really have to do that because there's WeChat. You just sign up for an official account on WeChat and you tie in with all of these services that are already offered on there. So you don't have to worry about payment and about how to talk to your customers and so on. All you have to do is get an official listing for your products out there. Right, let's look at some stats since we are at a bank, and stats in China are always a nice thing to look at because these numbers are just staggering. It's really, really hard actually to comprehend that, specifically coming from New Zealand, and I've kind of gone the other way because the city where I lived, Shanghai, has about 5 times as many people as the whole of New Zealand. And there's more people on the public transport every day in Shanghai than there are in New Zealand. So really, in terms of marketing, it's a completely different way of thinking. There's also a whole bunch of people online, as is not surprising, and these numbers are still growing. As far back as 2011, when there was no WeChat, 40% of internet users were using social media heavily. More than 80% of the internet users have multiple accounts on social media, so you don't decide for one thing and you just act there. People are very used to switching back and forth between all the different things. Whenever there's something new, people know about it and they sign up for accounts. So people are very, very active online. They're also very active online shopping, so this is the number I mentioned in the beginning. Almost 500 million online shoppers, and this means that's about 70% of the internet users that buy online. Interestingly, they do that even in places where internet connection isn't particularly good, in the 3rd, 4th tier cities where you might not expect it, where you might think, oh, well, I don't need to worry about marketing to those people. No, online shopping is everywhere, specifically in those places where maybe that's the only way to get the products that you want to buy. If we look at the overall retail, e-commerce makes up for almost 16%. Might not sound that much, but you can see here grayed out. The US has just over 7%, so it's twice the amount of e-commerce that the US has, or double the percentage of overall e-commerce. Overall commerce is in e-commerce, and that's when you think of how dominant Amazon and eBay and so on are in the US. That shows how much more dominant places like Taobao and WeChat actually are. The annual online retail sales in China surpassed those of the US back in 2013, and they continue to grow rapidly. Here's a forecast, an estimation for 2015, and this is in yuan. In New Zealand dollars, that's $800 billion. To put this into perspective, I looked up what the GDP was, and New Zealand's GDP last year was $240 billion. So So there's a lot of money to be made there. Now the question is, how do we get some of it? Going on the marketplace. This is a picture of Chipolo in Shanghai. That's an area of a couple of streets that just consists of shopping malls. It's a shopping mecca. It's just malls with tiny shops, and they're all selling quite similar things. They're all competing with each other over the customers, of which there are a lot. And that's very similar in the online space. It's a very, very crowded place. You really, really need to stand out to sell your produce. I've heard some estimates that say there's about 500 new products being introduced in China every day. How do you stand out? Deals and promotions are extremely important. Now, Chinese customers like to haggle. This is different online. It's harder to do online, so what you do is you look for deals. You want to get a good price for the products, and there's a whole number of different occasions that the platforms are using to promote deals and to give the brands a good chance to lower their prices and to advertise. The Singles Day is one that is mentioned quite a lot and actually breaks record sales every single year. There's actually 3 different Singles Days per year in China. The biggest one is the 11th of November, which is 1111. So the couples go to a restaurant and have a nice meal. The singles go online and buy lots of stuff and make lots of good deals to feel better. Trust was touched upon in the last talk, and trademarks are extremely important. You want to really protect your brand, but Chinese consumers are not necessarily looking for that. They have a lot of skepticism over official information that is available. They much rather look for recommendations from their networks, from their friends and family, from celebrities, from opinion leaders. They will also talk a lot with the sales agents to figure out if they can trust you, if the product's genuine, if this is really what they want. So you need to be prepared to have those conversations with your customers. Some companies go into China approaching a test and learn kind of method. So for example, Dove had this Real Woman campaign a number of years ago, which they wanted to use in China as well. And so they did exactly what I said in the beginning. They just translated it and put it out the same way as in Western countries, where this was a very successful campaign of showing real women and their bodies. Now that completely failed in China. So these women were perceived as not very attractive and overweight. Not a great advertisement for the products. Now Dove didn't really completely drop that thinking. They didn't give up on the idea, because that is their brand identity. But they found a different way for the customers to see that by placing their products in a Chinese version of the Ugly Betty TV show. So they had a more positive message there that they also combined with very active social media and engagement, and that was extremely successful for them in the end, really increasing the brand awareness by more than 40% and increasing the sales by more than 20%. But of course you have to be able to afford such an approach, and for a small company that is completely new to a market, this is maybe not the right way to go. And finally, language. Now, Chinese is a difficult language. It's even more difficult when it's written, so when you have to read and write Chinese. But unfortunately, it's even more difficult for the internet language. And this has many reasons, and that's probably a bit too much for this talk. But the Chinese use a lot of expressions online that Google Translate will not pick up on, and I can see you laughing there. I have to apologize for this example because it's quite rude. It is a swear word that doesn't translate to a swear word. So the literal translation, Google will tell you this means grass mud horse. That is not what it means. So you have to not just speak the language, but you have to actually really understand how people communicate online in China. And lots of big companies have got this really wrong. We heard the three-legged horse example from Rob Lauren earlier. There's many examples. Pepsi was one of the first ones to get it really, really wrong when they went into the Chinese market. They took their slogan that was Pepsi brings you back to life. They translated it into Chinese without realizing that the slogan could also be interpreted as Pepsi brings your ancestors back from the grave. Culturally quite tricky. Kentucky Fried Chicken did not learn from that. They did the same thing. They had a finger licking good slogan. You can kind of think that would be a tricky one to translate, but they tried anyway. And they came out with eat your fingers off. Delicious. So actually you were talking about earlier that that's a service that you can help your customers with, like really coming up with a good name that cannot be misread. Or if it is, at least it's something that isn't completely ruining your brand message. And this is certainly something that we can help with as well. We also have a very good understanding at Dakai of a completely new generation of Chinese customers called the 90s generation. Now this is the group of people that was born after 1990, which scarily is actually people who are 25 now, up to 25. And this is a very, very different generation to the previous ones, because these are people who grew up in an open China. They grew up in a one-child policy. They grew up being spoiled a lot. They grew up getting all the things that they wanted, and with an awareness for international brands, international media, and international ideas as well. They also grew up with the internet, with mobile devices, with all of the things that their counterparts in Western countries grew up with. So they have a very, very good understanding of what's going on online. And actually they have an understanding what's going on online in China and in the rest of the world. So these are the people that we work with at Dakai as well, because they have really the best overview of everything that is happening. But also they're the most affluent group of buyers in China. So they are the ones that spend the most money online, that have the most money to spend. So more than 80% of this 90s generation shop online. Is a perfectly normal thing to do. You don't even necessarily know offline ways to shop anymore. Even more so than the rest of the buyers groups, they listen to celebrity endorsement, recommendations from their friends and networks, and pop culture in general. But there's also now starting to be more and more subcultures in China, and actually a growing individualism. So I find that really, really interesting, because that means there is an opportunity for niche brands to find a very specific audience that will not go for just the huge brand names, but very specific things, and they know exactly what they want, and they want that to be special and different from other people. And finally, relating back to what we heard in the previous talk, you do have to be very careful of counterfeits in China. But this is not just about products. This is also about messages. This is about anything that you can read online. The Chinese government has always employed people to help spread positive messages online, and this is a term that the Chinese internet community uses for those people, and the messages are often easy to spot. But what is happening more and more is that companies employ artificial writers to write positively about their products as well in social media channels, and use that as a way to promote. So when you're doing market research in China, you really want to be able to distinguish between the real customer voices and the fake customer voices. So again, you need somebody who really speaks the language, understands those channels, and can help you figure out what people are actually saying. Now, to combine doing that, finding somebody who can really communicate your brand message, your brand values, and respond to every single of your consumer requests sounds pretty challenging and is a lot of work. And this is where we can help with Dakai, and we think that there's a huge opportunity of employing and working with the Chinese graduates that we have here. There's about 30,000 currently studying in New Zealand, a massive workforce that we would like to bring together with businesses and really learn from and benefit from. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can get in touch with Kate and me at Dakai, and follow us on Twitter and the likes. Find us on Wechat.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, that's it. Thank you.